This video is sponsored by K-Weets, makers of thermal cameras, multimeters, heat guns, and a whole lot more in the way of DIY repair tools, including this, the ES21 electric screwdriver set they sent me to test, which I will be using for this project. It has a ton of bits, including 5 different tri-points, one of which you will need to open the Joy-Cons. They are Y00, aka S2, aka Y1.5, and of course a PH000 Phillips bit. It has a USB-C port here on the bottom. Just plug that in and you'll be charging the driver while it's stored away, or of course you can take it out and charge it separately. If you want to help support my channel, check out their store and use coupon code GCPR15. It is valid indefinitely. Today I'm going to take these Joy-Cons and give them a new look by replacing the outer shell with these transparent ones. If you're watching this video, that means that this project was a success and these are in fact good quality shell case replacements. They do come in a variety of colors. I will put the links in the video description. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the right Joy-Con here, and when you take this apart, what you'll find is that there is a top panel, a center panel, and then a bottom panel. So this is basically where the battery sits on the inside here. That goes in this way and so forth. What I like to do in order to keep this thing from wobbling around, because we're going to have it on this side, and of course the joystick's going to be sticking out like that. So what I'm going to do is take a couple of game cases and just set this down so that we can elevate this enough so that it will stay flat. This is not a required step, but I think it's going to help me out as far as the camera's concerned, and it just keeps everything kind of stabilized here. We have 4 screws on the outside here. These are not going to stick to your magnetized bit, so you may have to actually grab a hold of them with your fingers or a pair of tweezers, and I'm going to be using my electric screwdriver in order to remove these. And as you can see, even though I unwound them all the way, they are not coming out of the case. So I'll go ahead and take these out. Alright, and we are ready to open this up. So what you're going to do is just come along the bottom side here. Now mine is already opening because I did take this apart earlier just to get a look at the inside, but you're probably going to need a pry tool of some sort. These work pretty well. Guitar pick, if you have a credit card, you might be able to get inside there. But what you're going to do is just kind of go around the edge and work your way in. Don't go too far. There are some cables and things inside that you don't want to damage. But for the most part, it should not take a lot of force to open this up. And you're just going to fold it over this direction. And now it closed back up on me. So there are some cables inside. So when you lift this up and flip it over, they should still be attached. So you'll see we have one here and one here. This one's a little tricky to get to. My Wi-Fi cable has already come unstuck, so this should actually be in position right inside here, and there's some adhesive that holds it down. And what you're going to do is just get behind that and kind of pry it away from the edge of the battery compartment like that. And then there is an antenna wire way down inside here. But what I'm going to recommend you do before you get to that point is go ahead and disconnect the battery. This is our first step generally when we're working with electronics. So we're going to come in under the battery, but it's actually above where this flex cable sits, because remember, we've got a battery compartment that's a separate plastic piece. So if you just go along the edge of the battery, and as soon as you can get your pry tool inside, just push in this way, and if you give it a bit of a twist, it should lift up and away from the adhesive. You don't need to go too far, and this is going to probably surprise you as much as it did me, but the easiest way to get this battery out, because we do have adhesive behind it, but we've also got it connected way down inside here. Very difficult to pry that, so I would recommend you just grab these 2 wires, yes, and just lift them straight up, and this is durable enough that you should not do any damage to that connector. Now once we've got the battery out, we can go ahead and move forward without worrying too much because we don't have any electricity on the inside. Now you will want a pair of tweezers to get underneath this little antenna connector. So if you go underneath the metal piece and lift straight up, that'll pop right out. And I'm also going to set this piece aside for later on. And we have a gate that we want to open up right down in here. So if you very gently get behind the side that's closest to us here, you can just flip this upwards, and that will disengage this cable, so you can pull this cable straight out at that point. Now the other cable is a little trickier. I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a minute. the way that that is connected, it doesn't just slide right out once you lift the gate up. You've actually got to lift the cable up and then pull it out. So we can't really do that from this point yet. I'm going to switch my bit over to my Phillips, which is what we'll be using for the majority of this, other than the outside screws. And from here, we're going to remove this battery compartment. So you've got a screw here, one here, and one up here. And these, fortunately, will stick to your magnetized bit. And our last screw is a little tricky to see. It's actually down in here. And once you've got those out, you should be able to lift out this plastic piece. Do be careful though, because what we have is a spring-loaded mechanism here and underneath here. So as I lift this up, it's actually going to fold over this direction, because there's also a cable that we need to release. I'll try to get this at an angle where you can actually see it. You have to watch out for this spring that's down inside here. You don't want that to go flying across the room. So what I usually do is just kind of compress the button, lift up on this side, and then slowly release it, and you should be able to get this to come out without losing the spring. So this upper cable, which is on my left-hand side, needs to come out. And to open this gate, you got to come in from this side, lift that up, and then we can kind of slide that cable away. I'm going to set this aside for a minute. And what we're going to do now is disconnect this cable. Okay, from here we can actually move this part aside. We'll come back to that shortly. This little vibrator down at the bottom here, you should be able to grab a hold of this and lift it out. And then if you grip it as close to the base as possible, give it a bit of a, you might have to hold on to the board here. Just lift it up, that unplugs just like that. And we will set that aside. And from here, we're going to go ahead and remove the joystick itself. So let's go ahead and disconnect this cable first, right here. Pull this out away from that, and now we've got two screws here that are going to allow that to come out. And when you remove this, you may have to do a bit of maneuvering because there's a little rubber or plastic seal underneath here that it tends to get caught up on. So if you just kind of move it around a bit, don't force it, you should be able to come through that little piece like so. I want to try to keep that in as good a shape as possible. And now from here, we're really down to just a couple things, and that is the motherboard itself, which is held in by these two screws. We've got a piece right here we're going to actually lift up because it's just kind of sitting down inside the housing. It doesn't need to be detached, it just needs to be lifted out. There's a cable attached to it, and as you might have noticed just now, my trigger just fell out. So this is what I wanted to warn you about. So we'll set this part aside, and what I like to do from here is have my new front panel ready to go so that we can just do a smooth transition from here to here. There's no need to take this out, set it aside, and then bring it all back over. We'll get these two screws out, and then we'll just move the motherboard along with the piece that's attached to it underneath, which I'll show you in just a second. So these two upper screws are going to come out. And this is just another slightly awkward design. So as we lift the motherboard out, we're going to see that there is a couple things going on here. One, our buttons, which are ready to fall out at any moment, which is another reason I like to kind of keep this elevated. That way we're not pushing from underneath them. And if you take a plastic stick spudger, we want to get underneath this entire piece right here and just kind of lift it out. It only has adhesive holding it in. And once you've got it unstuck from the inside of the Joy-Con and we've got this thing out, you should be able to work this thing away from here. There may be a bit of adhesive underneath this, so you want to get under that, let it out. And like I said, from here, I want to move this across directly, but first we need to get our buttons in place. So if you're with me up to this point and your buttons are still inside the shell, that's great. It's going to make your life a little bit easier. If not, you'll have to do a little extra work as far as figuring out where everything sits. So let's take out this little rubber piece, and one by one I'm going to transfer these over. Set the rubber piece back down. Make sure that's centered, and then up here we have a rubber cover over our plus button. So this one's a little trickier to get a hold of. You may actually have to lift it up a bit. We'll move that right over. We're going to take this piece and move it from here over to here. So again, with your tweezers, you should be able to get underneath here, and there are a couple holes that show you where it lines up. A little bit of adhesive holding it in. Now we want this to be right up against the edge. You can see there's only really one way this will fit. Like so. Put this inside here. And when we fold this over and push it down, if you want to double check, all of your buttons should be clicking at this point. But obviously you really don't want to let go of that grip too much, so I would probably go ahead and just put these screws in, and then we'll go and test it. Getting the screws on your driver is a little tricky. Now if everything's aligned properly, all of your buttons should click except for the home button. And I'll show you why right now. So plus button, X, Y, A, B. The home button's not really going to click yet because this board still moves around a bit until we get the shell completely assembled. Now from here we will grab our joystick, get this back inside. Like I said, you might just have to do some maneuvering. Once that sits down, we'll go ahead and put these screws in. And you can always turn this by hand, by the way, which is kind of nice. If you're worried about over torquing anything, now I do need to go this direction so that we can plug in the joystick itself. Close up that little gate. And now we want to be ready with a couple of things. So I'm going to switch over. We'll set this aside for the moment. We've got a couple of springs inside here. There's one here and one down in there. And you don't want those flying across the room either. So what I'm going to recommend you do is just kind of hold on like this, and we're going to pry from inside here. Now do make sure you have a good grip on this so it doesn't take off across the room. And we're just going to lift up because there's a couple clips inside that we want to disengage. Like so. And now when we release it, you'll see those are the two springs that we need to transfer over to these pegs. And we've just got one screw here for this flex cable. And no adhesive, at least on mine. So we can just lift this up. Move it over. Get our screw back in. And we are ready to install this piece. Again, what you're going to have to do is make sure that these little pegs on the bottom here are aligned with those springs. And that is a little tricky. And of course the springs are going to want to fall out of here. So we need to get them balanced and get right down on top of them. Might take you a couple tries, but it's not the most difficult thing I have ever run into here. So once you've got those aligned, kind of hold them in place, push down on the left hand side until it pops, and then you can check and make sure that those springs are straight. And if they're not, you just want to take them off and try again. But most importantly, when you finish, this should click and push back. Now for this piece, we're going to have a few things to take out from here, including this little button on the back. So there's only one screw holding this rail in here. So what we're going to do is just take out this Phillips screw. And this is going to lift out. There may be a small bit of adhesive behind it here, but you can just lift this thing out like so. And there's what we'll be working with. Now this little button right here is going to transfer straight across. Okay, that's going to go in there. So I'll leave that over here for the moment. And what we're going to do is change out these little buttons on the inside. So you've got an SR and an SL, and there are clear plastic pieces that you can replace them with. This is kind of optional too. I mean, I'm not sure that too many people are ever going to be seeing this part of it, but you can change this over if you want to. We've just got a couple screws here and here. And you can lift out this piece, and then we have a rubber stopper here, and this is going to be our SL button. And again, you know, you can't really mess these up because they have a little notch or two at the top, so only one of these will fit in and in the right position, so don't have to worry too much about that. That'll go right in there. We'll pull out this rubber stopper. That one's kind of stuck inside, so we'll pull that out, that aside. Goes down in here. Put that on. This one goes in here. And that is just about it for this piece. We'll get this back on. And there's a dot here, or a little hole that you can line up right there. Okay, and when you get done, these should also click. And we're going to move this right over to here. And again, you've got a peg right here. We're sitting down on the bottom, and then one screw hole at the top. And this piece is ready to go. So let's take this part and make sure that we get these cables plugged in. Now I'm going to move over to the microscope so that I can show you what I was talking about with this particular connector. So if you take a look here, let's zoom in, and you'll be able to see that there's a notch on either side here. So here and here, you've actually got to lift the cable up and go down inside here. You can't just slide it in from the outside because these are in the way. So when you install this thing, these little tabs have to go in from an angle, and then they catch just like that. So that way it's kind of locked into place. We'll go ahead and close it up, and I'll move back over to the camera. And now we'll go ahead and put this cable in. Make sure that's all the way in. And we can flip the gate down towards us. Remember, we've got this spring-loaded thing, and it's going to want to shoot out. So put that in last. And we're going to start by inserting this cable down here. So I'm going to have to rotate this just a bit. What we're going to do now is get this trigger in, and just the reverse of the way that we took it out. So I like to put the bottom end in first over here. Make sure not to put any tension on these flex cables. And once we get this in over here, you want your spring to be on the outside like that. And then it should click. And then as soon as you are certain you have everything aligned properly, we want to flip this over this way without anything shifting in the process. And then we're going to just hold it down, and I'm going to wish I had kept this thing elevated, but I think we can get this done. All right, we are in the home stretch. Let's go ahead and put this piece down at the bottom, and you may need some tweezers to align it in order to get it plugged in. Let's go ahead and do the antenna first. Make sure you get this inside of these channels right here. That kind of keeps it aligned. And then getting this plugged in is always fun because you've got to center it on top of the connector. Make sure it's straight before you put any pressure on it. And it will snap into place. Now we've got our battery. We'll go ahead and attach the battery connector first. Goes inside the case, and want to make sure that these cables don't get pinched. As we flip this over, everything should have a nice even seam around the edges, and then we can get some of our screws installed. And that is one down. All right, left Joy-Con, or left con, whatever you want to call it. We are going to follow the same process here for the most part, with some minor differences on the inside. Alright, so here's the other view. We're going to come in from here, right in here. Lift that up. Let's lift it up a little more from this side. Pull on the wire. Comes right out. One cable. This little buzzer. Stuck in there a little more. Right, let's go ahead and unplug these two cables. This is actually coming out, and we need this out of the way in order to get to one of the screws for the thumbstick. So, go ahead and take out these two gold screws. Maneuver this thing through if you have to. Shouldn't be too tricky, just take your time and don't force anything. And you should be able to come out sort of at an angle here, one side of it before the rest, without damaging that little seal underneath it. So we've got 3 screws here at the top. Go ahead and take those out. Remember where they go. A lot of these are the wrong or different sizes, so you do not want to mix them up. Alright, so we'll put that in later. And what we're going to do now, again, in one smooth motion, is take out this little motherboard, move this and the buttons below straight across, and then get the motherboard back in. I wouldn't stress on this one too much. It's pretty easy to deal with. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and move it over right now. Only one direction it'll fit, so don't worry. If you flip it over, you'll just have to keep adjusting it until you have it facing the right way, which I just flipped over again. I'm going to check here, make sure all my buttons are clicking. Again, except for this one, but don't worry about that one too much. Alright, we're going to set this aside for a minute. Let's go ahead and get this transferred over. Have one screw here at the top, which, if you can see that. Get this out. Might have a little bit of adhesive right there in the center. And don't forget, we have a button we need to transfer right here over to there. But before we go too far, we are going to switch out our SL and SR buttons on the inside. So let's see, that's SL, SR. Alright, let's go ahead and get everything transferred on our battery compartment. So again, we're going to have some clips here at the top and a couple springs on the inside to watch out for. So if you can, just kind of secure this, get your pry tool in there, pop those clips out, don't lose your springs, that is the idea. Alright, let's go ahead and move this over. Alright, springs. Alright, so if this looks a little tricky, I'm going to say it is. See if we can get a good view here. And you see what we have. These pegs are kind of at an angle like this. Yeah, lost our spring. Getting a good camera angle here is a little tricky. Again, we're going to have this connector that needs to go down, but you can't just push it straight in. You've got to clear the edge, as in the previous Joy-Con. Once we do, we can flip that down just like that. Now we're going to do trigger. In carefully with the spring, make sure that thing's kind of straight, or as straight as possible. Clicking right here. Gotta say, I don't love this ribbon cable right here. So we want to be very careful and make sure it doesn't get trapped. Oh, and I just lost my trigger. So if you're like me, you've probably done about 7 or 8 of these already, just trying to get it to go straight, or repeated it several times. Make sure the screw goes down in there, somewhat straight. And then we want to get this down, again, without trapping that ribbon cable. So this should kind of go underneath here, along the edge. There we go. I want that cable to be down inside there. Just like that. Let's get some of these screws in. Alright, we're just about there. Get the vibrator installed. Battery next. Thank you, Nintendo, for not making it a contest to see how much adhesive you can put underneath your batteries. Most of these manufacturers tend to overdo it. However, I think all of our battery adhesive stayed on the old piece, so we're going to add a little bit on the inside here. Let's see. Go here. And here. Okay. Let's make sure everything lines up. No cables are trapped. And we are ready for our screws. All right, everything's clicking, and there we have it.